You're listening to the Active Mom Podcast with host Dr. Carrie Pagliano. I'm a mom, physical therapist, and your go-to guide for staying active with pelvic health issues in pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, and beyond. Whether you're a fellow mom, physical therapist, or women's health professional, join me where I'll share expert insights, real-life stories, and the latest research to help you approach running, CrossFit, yoga, Pilates, HIIT, or whatever activity you love with confidence and evidence-informed guidance. Let's start the show. All right, welcome back to the Active Mom Podcast. We are so lucky today that we have Dr. Hannah Cabre to come talk to us about some of the biggest questions that women have: contraception, what that does with our muscles, what does it do, like, how does it affect us, nutrition, all the nutrition questions. And she's got a bunch of papers out, and we have a lot of questions for her. So, Dr. Hannah Cabre, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you work, and what your favorite nutritional tip. We'll start super easy.
Great. Yes, I am currently at Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Louisiana. It's affiliated with LSU, so I'm doing my postdoctoral research fellowship here. I graduated with my PhD from UNC at Chapel Hill. I'm a registered dietitian, so I'm very passionate about all things women's health and nutrition and exercise. So that is a little bit about my background. My dissertation was specifically in hormonal contraception, and it's a line that I've been able to continue. Right now, I'm doing a little bit more clinical work with nutrition interventions, but still all within women's health.
Gotcha. All good things that we're like, okay, let's dive into all this. Okay,
Yes, and
so
I forgot
yeah,
my
no, go ahead.
tip. Yes, the number one tip is to focus on getting 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal.
Oh, good. We're working on that because I
Mhm.
don't know if you saw, if you're in meme land, but those of us who are diving headfirst into perimenopause, there was some
Mm.
meme. I think it was like Big Time Adulting, and she's like, "You need number of grams of protein as there are stars in the sky." I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah,
it kind of feels like that."
it does. Yes. How much of your adult life is spent thinking
Oh
about
my
protein
gosh.
intake?
I was literally thinking yesterday about my mom at my age. I'm 48.
Mm,
I think one of us might have been out of the house. I'm one of 3. And I'm like, she didn't have to deal with the internet, social
right.
media, people telling her all the things that she should
Mhm.
be doing. I don't even think there were protein recommendations back in the day, or if they were very kind of like nondescript. Um, let's just dive right into the protein
Sure.
chaos. Like, where did all this come from, and why all of a sudden, especially those of us who work out, especially going into perimenopause, why do we need so much, and what does that even look like? Because some people, they think it just like you just need to eat a chicken every day, and I don't have time for that.
Yeah. So the recommended daily allowance is a little hard to understand sometimes. It's zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, but in the US, we don't really do weight in kilograms. So I think for a long time, people just didn't really know what that meant and didn't really focus on it. They just thought that having more of the traditional diet of protein at every meal was sufficient. And then, really, in the sports world, it became a focus of how much protein should we be eating to support increases in lean mass. And from there, a lot of research has expanded to how much we should be eating per day. And the consensus is that it's a lot more than just zero point 0.8 grams per
Right.
kilogram of body weight. It's actually probably closer to just about 1.2 for inactive individuals and then higher for active individuals. The big thing with that is that certain conditions like exercise or perimenopause, they can cause this increase in protein turnover. So, how quickly your body is utilizing protein rather than storing it. So, that's why you need to eat some more of it because you don't have a lot of protein just stored in the body that can be consistent. So, you need to eat to kind of counteract some of that breakdown that's happening in your body. So that is where a lot of this came from. And so we realized that we were under eating protein in terms of what we probably should be for overall health. And now that has kind of caused this like a little bit of a frenzy of how much do I need? What does that look like? And it feels like, oh my gosh, I have to eat, so much protein overall.
Yeah.
But really just focusing, kind of breaking it down into the 20 grams per meal is a lot easier to think about. So that can be a variety of things. It can be from whole foods, it can be from supplements. So, something like a Premier protein shake that's already ready to go, or Fairlife, those can be really good to supplement into the diet too.
Those are my
To get,
favorite.
yeah, to
I
get
love Fairlife.
I know. That's really great around a workout.
Yep.
And then at a meal, you can look at having Greek yogurt, eggs. If you eat meat, that is a great source of it also. So just really kind of being intentional is, I think, the biggest thing. And hitting your protein goal per day is great, but just really focusing on like every time you're eating, having some protein source is a good kind of reframe, I think. Not just, oh, I have to have a certain number of grams per kilogram,
Right.
just really being intentional about eating protein versus just carbohydrates or fat.
Yeah. No, I definitely think again, from the generation that we were told
Mhm.
low fat, low carb, low everything,
Exactly.
this was kind of a little bit of whiplash where we're like, "Hey, what's going on here?"
Yeah.
And then it was
Yes.
like, my favorite was eat your body weight in grams of protein, and I'm like, for
Mhm.
if you have somebody, speaking purely from a pelvic floor perspective, that they have no idea how much protein they're eating, and maybe they're eating like 30 grams a day, and then they try and
Mhm.
eat like 140 grams a day and don't increase their fiber, bad things happen.
Yes, definitely. Yes, it's all part of the balance. I think another thing is people think, "Oh, if I eat 140 grams of protein, it's gonna fix all these problems."
Right.
It's not really
Right.
like a source of, fixing any health issues. It's just more of this support. How can you be the healthiest version of yourself? And one part of that is increasing protein, especially for individuals who are active or who have, different conditions postpartum, during pregnancy. All of these things can like influence the amount of protein that you need per day. So yeah, just being really intentional, I think, is the big thing. And it's much easier to say, okay, at my 3 meals, my goal is just focusing on the 20 grams. And
Yeah.
that like makes it much more easy to obtain,
Yeah.
rather than just like going for 140 grams a day.
Yeah, no, that can be
Hard.
a lot.
Yeah.
My husband the other day, he's like, "Why do we just have meat in the
Mhm.
refrigerator?" And I was like, "Dude, because 'cause I'm perimenopausal, and that's what we
Yeah.
have to do, aren't you?" Like, I guess I haven't paused to explain to him what's going on. What?
Mhm.
You
I
did
know.
a paper specifically looking at, nutrition and cardiovascular risk during menopause. Um,
Yes.
what made you think to look at that, and then what did you find?
Yes, that's a great question. So, really, what I wanted to look at was women as they transition through menopause, especially in that midlife time period, have an increase in their risk of cardiovascular disease. So, heart attacks, different diseases like high blood pressure, atherosclerosis, which is just like rigidity in your vessels. And all of this kind of adds up to risks of possibly death or just disease state. And we don't really see the same transition in men. Their disease risk kind of stays the same until a little bit later in life. So it happens much earlier in women. And the thought is that that's tied to the loss of estrogen through
Mm,
perimenopause. So a big recommendation from the American Heart Association is dietary management. And so our specific thought was, well, we should dive into the literature and look at what the recommendations are for cardiovascular disease, and then are there recommendations specifically for midlife women?
mhm,
And so what we found was that some of the same recommendations for just general health apply, but specifically in women in midlife, the Mediterranean diet was very, very beneficial. And so, what that looks like is increasing your fruits and vegetables intake, prioritizing olive oil as your main cooking source, decreasing any refined sugars, kind of focusing on those whole grains. And then also, most importantly, increasing your fish intake. So, at least one serving per week. And then the more that there was for the omega 3 and omega 6 fatty acids, the lower risk that these women had. So that was really encouraging. And then the other one was the DASH diet, which is very similar, but it focuses on a lot of decreasing sodium intake. So again, high fruits, high vegetables, and just focusing on more of those like whole food sources.
Mhm.
Um, a big push right now, especially at Pennington, is precision for nutrition health. So, looking at the individual and what your own kind of workup looks like and how that can predict some of these nutrition requirements. We're not there yet, but just focusing kind of on if you have a certain condition, being able
Mhm.
to treat that with the diet in support of medications if you need those, but really focusing on some of those eating patterns that have been shown to be helpful.
Yeah, no, it's something that it caught my eye, about a year ago when I slammed headfirst, unbeknownst to me, into perimenopause,
Mhm.
because my blood pressure was high, came off
Right.
contraception, oral contraception, so we're gonna bridge both conversations here.
Yes.
And then blood pressure got better, but cycle didn't come back.
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, yep, you're on your way." Started with menopause hormone therapy with the patch, progesterone,
Mhm.
all that good stuff. Things are better, but a year later, like it's still borderline.
Right.
And so they're like, "Oh, well, we can put you on blood pressure medicine or look at your diet." And what cracked me up is when you're saying lower salt, and I usually drink an element or 2 a day, so I'm like, "Oh god, is it the element?" Like, you're freaking
Yeah.
out because you're like, "How much of this is stuff can I control, and
Right.
how much of this is genetically who I am or related to, perimenopause or menopause?" And that's why I really appreciate that, like, individual look is like, no, you kinda have to look at all these parts and pieces, and
Mhm.
we would love to give general recommendations, but in some cases, we do need to go probably a little bit deeper.
Right. And it's so individual too, because someone who's active probably does need some of those supplements
Right.
like the element because you
Yep.
have sweat and just like increased needs already. So that might not be a contribution for you, but
Right.
someone who is not as active, it could be. So taking it into consideration on the person first is really, I think, where the field is going, hopefully. And there's
Yeah.
a big push for it too. But yes, lots of you mentioned fiber earlier. That's a big piece that helps, especially with that cholesterol. So the only way you can remove cholesterol from your body is through fiber. So that's why when you see Cheerios, it says heart healthy because they're very high in fiber
Mm.
with a whole grain source. So that's a big emphasis there. And then all of the fruits and vegetables have very good phytochemicals. So, those are pieces that help with your vessels and having good integrity in those. So, all of that kind of adds up to this heart healthy diet. And lower inflammation is always going to be important too, especially during perimenopause.
Yep.
So, focusing on foods that lower inflammation is great.
Yeah, I feel like that's been a lot of the conversation. For those of us in pelvic floor land, we love
Mhm.
fiber because it's happy poop, you know?
Yeah,
We
we
don't
love
wanna
it.
strain, we want it like butter.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's good that we have different reasons for the recommendations, but it all ends up with, like, happy body stuff, which
Yes,
is good.
exactly.
Can you speak to, kind of adjacent to nutrition? There's a lot of conversation in perimenopause, menopause land about supplements.
Mhm.
It's a very big hot topic. A lot of the ones that come up, it's. I feel like there's stuff that hasn't necessarily been looked at yet. So creatine, for example, and I do think you have a paper that kind
Mhm.
of looked at that. Like, where's the benefit of creatine in the life cycle? And are there places where we just don't know enough to be able to say, yeah, this is a thing? And what is creatine for people that don't know?
Sure. So creatine is usually a powder form. There are some newer versions where you can take it in like a gel form or a pill form, but it's a molecule that's naturally occurring in our body. And the big piece that it supports is energy production. So we have a enzyme called creatine kinase that is the cleaver of phosphate in our body that creates energy from ATP. So it's kind of like that piece that's like just part of currency in our body for energy. And so the thought is that if you have a higher amount of creatine stored up in your body, then that allows you to be more efficient at energy production. And it first started out as a big supplement in sports world to say, okay, well, if I have this increase in energy production, then I'll have greater strength and power and endurance. And we do see that all those things happen in sports when you take creatine. And so a lot of this was then like, okay, it's so good for sports, but what other health benefits are there? And
Mhm.
there are so many. So it helps with mental health and just mood. And in the paper that I have on creatine across the lifespan, we look specifically at different phases and considerations for women. So women tend to have a higher rate of depression from than men, and part of that, there's like a theory that creatine is lower in women, and creatine kinase production in the brain is lower also. And so when there is supplementation with creatine, that kind of improves that whole process and leads to a little bit better mood overall. Some of this research is still really new, but it's really exciting to see that something like just taking a supplement can help with mood. And then during pregnancy, creatine is also the need for creatine is increased. So it's a safe supplement to be able to take and help with that. And there's also some changes across the menstrual cycle that occur too, where in the luteal phase, that is lower for creatine kinase production. So it actually can support some energy across the menstrual cycle too. And then in perimenopause, all of these things are going to be important, even though you might not have a usual menstrual cycle, just that transition, all of the different factors that occur with your mental health and psychosocial. That can be a big piece. It helps with, there's some data showing that it might help with sleep. So lots of good things with that supplement. And it is the most studied. There's over 500 publications on it. It's very safe to take. And it's a pretty low barrier entry supplement too, just one scoop a day. Or there's some other ones like Crete has like a powder or like a gel form that you can just take. There used to be a thought that you'd have to, like, load it, so you'd have to do this
Mhm.
whole, like, 4 times a day for a certain number of days, but now it's just mostly just starting to take it 5 grams, you'll get to that point too. So if you're not taking it for, like, a specific performance measure, then you can
Mhm.
just do 5 grams per day. And creatine monohydrate is the form that you should go for. There's a few other ones out there, but yeah, just the tried and true one too. One comment I will say about supplements also is that there are some certifications you can look for. So one of them is called NSF, and if that is on any of the packaging, it means it's been tested and shows that that is actually what's in there.
Mm.
There's some other good brands too that you can look for. Is NSF certified. I think Thorn might be, but
Mhm.
there's other ones like Shifted has a really good product. Yeah, there's a lot of them. You can find creatine probably anywhere, but
Mhm.
just looking at ones that are NSF certified could be a good source for that.
Yeah. No, I feel like when you were talking about depression, we have some data now looking at, these low energy, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
low estrogen states, like in early postpartum and obviously going into perimenopause, where there's
Right.
an increased risk of depression. I'm like, I wonder if there's any correlation or something going on between what's going on with creatine levels and estrogen.
Yeah,
So I feel like there's so much that we don't know.
there is so much we don't know. Yes, it is a big question mark in women's health of how
Mhm.
just the loss of estrogen influences so much of the body, and
Mhm.
a big piece of that is finding supplements that support it. So,
Yeah.
creatine would be one that I would always recommend just for general health, but also for specific life stages of women. It's a great supplement.
Any others that you were like, "Yes, there's good data if that's something that you're interested in," and then also are there ones where you're like, Yeah, this is super people are talking about it, but, like, we don't have a lot of data behind it because I feel like the supplement industry is just, like,
Yeah.
gangbusters. I have a feeling it's gonna continue to grow over the next couple of years.
Yes, definitely. Yes, supplements can be really beneficial for supporting overall health, especially because, we have a certain amount of calories per day, but our supplement needs might be a little bit higher in different life stages like perimenopause. A big one would be going back to like the omega 3s. So,
Mhm,
especially for individuals who don't eat fish very often, having a supplement of omega 3s can be really, really good. There's a ratio of omega 3s to omega 6s. So having about like a 5-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 would be helpful. The reason it seems like omega-3s are like, that's the one you should be really having, but they're a little harder to get within the diet overall, so that's why
mhm.
omega-6s are a little bit elevated. Both combined together are really important. Omega-6s alone, kinda get a bad rap for inflammation, but combined, they're very helpful. So if a fish oil supplement can be really great, looking at a high level of DHA and then I think it's EPA. Those two ones are going to be EHA. Yeah, those ones
Like,
are going to be. I was like,
I do the same thing, it's brain
yeah.
fog, right?
Um, those are gonna be if you can get, like, a supplement that has, like, the highest level of those would be, the ones to go for. And there's so many, again, on the market, but just looking kind of at the values and what you're gonna get from the supplement itself is gonna be good. The other one for women would be the 2 other ones would be calcium and vitamin D. So both of those taken together, calcium helps with vitamin D absorption, so it's needed. And then in women with the loss of estrogen, you're going to see impacts on your bone mineral density. And so having a higher level of calcium is going to be very important, and vitamin D too in that life stage. So I always recommend that. For vitamin D, it's about 2,000 international units a day, and then for calcium, it kind of ranges depending on the state, but just a general calcium supplement would be really helpful for that too. Some vitamin D supplements will have calcium in it also, so just pay attention that you're not like doubling up too much. And that would be also really important if women aren't consuming any dairy. So that's like a great source of calcium. But if there's not like a big dairy intake, then that supplement would be very needed. One that's
Would
getting a lot of hype right now is
Yeah,
magnesium.
yeah.
Yeah,
Everybody
so
wants calm.
yes. And I think that there is really good data to support, especially for women taking magnesium. It's growing a lot in the field, and it shows a lot of help with sleep and just kind of relaxation, more so also with helping with like the GI tract and making sure that there's good movement there. So I recommend that one too. So those are like the main ones.
Okay.
There's so
Go
many
back
out there.
to, let's go back to, like, the calcium for
Mhm.
a second and the vitamin D. I feel like, again, is early postpartum another one of those areas that these might be beneficial, especially for lactating women?
That's a really great question. I'm not as familiar with that one,
Okay.
but I would say like yes. So coming off or coming out of pregnancy, you're going to have just like a lot of demands, but it's also going to be like an energy rich environment that you need to support. So,
Yeah.
yes, I think that the recommendation that I've heard from some of like the gynecologists at conferences and things is
Mhm.
that even continuing taking the prenatal vitamin while
Yep.
you're breastfeeding is really helpful.
Yep.
And those vitamins themselves are just so rich in calcium, vitamin D, folate, really important key nutrients. So that
Mhm.
would be my recommendation for postpartum women is just even continuing on taking that prenatal vitamin, especially for individuals who are lactating. That could be very, very supportive.
Yeah.
And then as you kind of transition more into that postpartum time period where it's like not as close, then you might be able to kind of go back to some of the pre-pregnancy habits of like key supplements.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The other the other thing I was thinking of, I have so many clients that their babies have GI issues,
Mhm.
and so mom has to do an elimination diet,
Yes.
and, of course, without really a lot of data support, the first thing that they go for is dairy and,
Mhm.
all sorts of things. And so moms lose that option to have milk or yogurt or, things like that. And I'm like, ooh, that might be a good place to make sure that you're getting that supplementation there as well.
Yes, I agree. And it depends on like the vitamin too, but you can always look at like the recommendation of percentages on the
Hmm.
label. So
Yep.
if calcium is at like 100%, then just the prenatal might work. And
Yep.
then if it's not, then that's where you could add in like an additional calcium supplement to get to that level per day.
Gotcha. No, that's fair.
Mhm.
Any supplements floating around where you're like, we just don't have the data?
I think there's some, there's always like, I feel like so many. A big one right now, I think, is like lion's mane that I've been seeing a lot of. I'm
I
not sure
forget
that
where I saw what the heck is that?
it's supposed to be like a supplement that helps with like brain health, but I'm not 100% sure that there's like enough data for that.
Mhm.
So that would be one that comes to mind. Um, Apple cider vinegar is another one that I see kind of make its rounds. That one is
Mhm.
not very supportive in terms of any benefit at all. Um, what other ones? I feel like there's so many I try to like tune
I
out
know.
for these.
Like, no, we're not gonna do that one.
I think, oh, like, cholesterol right now is, like, a big one, so, like, bovine cholesterol,
Ooh.
that's not really, like, a yeah, that one's, like, making a comeback, that's not very helpful, especially in powder form. I think probiotics and prebiotics can be really helpful, but in the powder form themselves, those are not going to be always like alive. So if they are like in high heat while they're being transported, they might have the risk of dying because they're live bacteria. And
Mhm.
so the powder form or like the pill form might not be as beneficial as some of like the liquid forms or trying to focus on eating that through fermented foods or yogurt. So yeah, those are probably like the big ones that come to my mind. But supplements are always hard because
I know.
people have such strong opinions on them.
There's a little drama over in, menopause land, lately
Yeah.
about about physicians, selling, supplements, and I'm just staying the
Yep.
heck out of it.
Mhm.
But I feel like I need to be educated on enough because inevitably somebody always asks me like, "Hey, what about creatine?" or "What about this?" or "What about that?"
Yeah.
And, I feel like we need to have an answer of like, "Hey, we have data or we do not have data." And I think
Mhm.
a lot of people don't understand, um, that with a lot of supplements, there's not rigorous, testing or approval or all
Exactly.
sorts of things like that. So it is kind of like the Wild West.
Right.
And I do feel like we're going to have a big shift in the
Mhm.
next couple of years in wellness kind of taking over the world. Well
Agreed.
intentioned, but maybe not well vetted research
Yeah.
information.
Mhm.
So,
Right, and I think another thing, like, I was just at Sam's Club this weekend getting, my omega-3, like, re-upping on that one,
mhm.
and then there's just so many that are just, like, lining the shelves, and it's just, like, you can
Right.
get any single vitamin by itself, like
Mhm.
B vitamins, which those, I guess, would be another one that I wouldn't recommend having alone, mostly because they're water soluble, so they just get excreted in your body doesn't use past what it needs. Same thing like you can get vitamin C, you can get vitamin E, you can get vitamin A. So all of those just by themselves are not going to be as helpful. If there are individuals who are wanting to take those and like seeing those and like, oh, that sounds so great. I should be having higher vitamins and minerals. A multivitamin itself would probably be the best way to go for that.
Yep.
It's going to give you what you need and probably be a lot more cost effective than buying each individual vitamin or mineral itself.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
fair.
will say during perimenopause, one thing that I would really encourage is doing like a blood work panel. So getting a lot of these tested. So you can test for a lot of these vitamins and minerals, your omega levels, and just kind of testing overall to see maybe
Mhm.
where you would need to supplement. Maybe your vitamin D is lower, or maybe it's okay. Maybe your calcium is lower, or kind of being able to like again address that to the person themselves versus just like blanket statement that you should always do.
Right.
But in
Right.
general, just knowing the American population and the research that I've done, there are certain ones that are very helpful just to support health.
Yeah. No, I think that's a PSA for if you don't have a primary care physician and get regular checkups, please go do that because a
Mhm.
lot of people, one, once they had kids, they kind of put that to the sidelines. And then the
Right.
last couple years, it's taking a lot longer to get to see providers. So don't
Yeah.
forget to check that list to just make sure you have good basic health, which is how I caught my blood pressure issues.
Yeah.
So
Right. And
do
I will
it.
say too, for especially the bone mineral density, women don't get DEXA scans very
Right.
early. And so, having just like a knowledge of what your vitamin D levels are, what your calcium levels are, even in like your 30s, even in your early
Hmm.
40s, like that can be a huge game changer for later in life and
Yep.
making sure that you have really good bone density. Because once that starts to decline, it's a little bit harder to
Right.
get back. So being proactive is going to be
Yep.
a very big key
I I
piece.
wish the DEXA scan what is it? I think you're supposed to go at 50
Mhm.
or something.
Yep,
I wish that was sooner, and
it should
especially
be, yeah.
in an active population. I've been very vocal. I'm a huge fangirl of ultra runners, one, because they talk about food all the time. They talk about reds, they talk about energy
Yeah,
deficiency, bone health, all that stuff. That needs to be a normal conversation, I think, across the spectrum with active women, period, not just in that
mhm.
um, ultra community. But yeah, I feel like we should get them sooner.
Yes,
Curious,
agreed.
I'd love to know.
Yes, and I will say if you're close to, like, a research institution, sometimes there'll be, like, targeted research
Mhm.
studies that will do DEXAs for you, so that can be a way to, like, get one earlier in life, but otherwise, it's not very accessible, so doing other things to, like, be proactive can be or proactive can be helpful.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I gotta double check into this. I have a friend that owns a bunch. She's like owns some gyms, and I
Mhm.
think you can go in and get DEXA scans, but it's for bodybuilding. They look for body composition. And
Mhm.
so before you prep to do all, your competition, you go in and you know what everything looks like. I don't know if that's the same thing or not, but
Yes,
I was
so it
I
would
was
be on the, like, printout that they would give you, your
okay,
bone content.
got it.
And then the repeated ones, it'll usually show you the value for that.
Yeah. No, I might just scoot over there for that. Definitely not for
Yeah.
figure competition, but
I know, as a health measure.
exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
All right, let's make a leap over to talk about contraception because um I feel like, it starting so early now, our
Mhm.
girls are being put on some sort of contraceptive choice. And I know back in the day when, that option was given to us, there was not really a conversation about
Mhm.
what does this mean later in life, in different stages, phases, what does this mean to your body, things like that. So maybe we start with like the basics of, everyday kind of oral contraception that the average woman might get put on.
Yeah, so oral contraception comes usually in 3 different versions. So there's the monophasic, the biphasic, and a triphasic. The most common is going to be the monophasic. So what that means is that you take a pill every single day for about 21 days. And then there's like a 7-day placebo pill or sugar pill that causes a withdrawal bleed. And it's called monophasic because you're taking the same dose of estrogen and progesterone every single day. And that blocks ovulation. So that's how it prevents pregnancy is through blocking ovulation because it basically suppresses the endogenous levels because your body recognizes that there's already a high level of estrogen, progesterone. And because that's a consistent amount across every day, there's no spike that leads to LH or luteinizing hormone, which is the one that causes ovulation. So that's how the mechanism of it works. And then in the other versions, the biphasic or triphasic, it's just a manipulation of those level of hormones over those 21 days, which are not as common as the monophasic, mostly just because there's like a higher risk if you miss a pill and just the
Yeah.
changes that are accrued with like varying levels of hormones that are coming from outside of your body. And so with oral contraception, I will say that like one of the key things is that that withdrawal bleed is not necessarily a true period. So when we're looking at specifically in athletes or maybe women who are nearing perimenopause, they still may be having like a monthly period, but it's not actually a period. It's a withdrawal bleed from being on high levels of estrogen and progesterone too. So when you take those away, it causes kind of that bleeding from just like kind of refreshing the system, if you will. But it's hard, and you mentioned red S, for individuals who may not be having a menstrual cycle due to
Mhm.
like energy restriction or over exercising to say if they are normally menstruating or not. So in athletes, that kind of is the big key perspective. And then also in perimenopausal women, if you are still not having a cycle, or if you're off it, like in your case, and then you don't have a cycle anymore, you may have been entered into that without even knowing
Right.
because you've been having a withdrawal bleed. I wouldn't necessarily say that those are bad things. It's really there's emerging research in terms of what it's doing for our overall performance and overall health. There is more data, I think, and this has been around for a long time. And they have really kind of not perfected, but improved the methods to lower risk of cardiovascular disease or some of these other outcomes.
Talk to me about some of the work that you've done, kind of looking at strength performance, those sorts of things related to hormonal contraceptives.
Yes. So that was a big piece of my dissertation when I was doing my doctorate. I was really passionate about this because we don't really know a lot about how it influences
Right.
different outcomes. We don't know a lot about how the different phases of the menstrual cycle impact it either. So all in one, I kind of wanted to do this just cross-sectional study of are there changes? And what I was hoping would happen and kind of did is that there wouldn't be very many changes, and the main reason I was is because there are so many kind of limitations for women in research already because of this perception of the menstrual cycle and perception of oral contraceptives and IUD use or intrauterine device use. So I wanted to contribute to this conversation that hopefully one day we have a really good quality body of research that we can like make these recommendations off of and say, okay, well, we don't actually have to exclude women because of their menstrual cycle phase or oral contraceptive use, and that could
Mhm.
decrease kind of this barrier to entry that researchers have. Um, on the other hand, people are really interested about it in terms of performance and does this impact my performance?
Mhm.
So that's what led me to do the research study. And I also included intrauterine device users. So those are a little bit different than the oral contraceptives we were just talking. So it provides only progestins and it's a localized amount. So it's directly into the uterus. So it influences the systemic amount of progesterone in the body, but it does not suppress any level of your usual hormones.
Mhm.
So there is a little bit of a thought that it might be closer to the amenorrheic menstrual cycle. And so we kind of included that to test some of these theories as well. And so what I found was that for strength and performance, the only one that was changed was between hormonal IUD users and oral contraceptive users. And that was in the leg press, where IUD users were stronger in their follicular phase and the oral contraceptive users were stronger in their luteal phase. So that was
Hmm.
really interesting, just kind of outcome that some maybe there is implications for larger muscle groups that
Mhm.
change with these versions of hormonal contraception. This was just a cross-sectional study, so definitely need some interventions to test it, but that was the main outcome there. And then I also did a lot of looking at fatigue. So we did
Mhm.
blood lactate, we did a time test to exhaustion on the cycle. It's a really, really hard test. And so what we found was that oral contraceptive users had slightly less recovery than the
Mhm.
other eumenoric women and hormonal IUD users. It wasn't significant in our study, but I think it is something to kind of consider if you're using an oral contraceptive, making sure that you have really good recovery methods after an exercise session.
So for the average person
Mhm.
taking something, is it really anything that we need to pay too much attention to? Because I know there was a huge surge in people saying, "Oh, well,
Mhm.
don't do that during this part of your cycle," and I feel like most of the world doesn't even realize the normal fluctuations that occur in estrogen, progesterone in a regular cycle, much less understand what goes on,
Yeah.
when they're on oral contraceptives. So
Definitely. I think for right now, there's not a really big need to do it's like the cycle syncing, right? So there's a
Mhm.
lot of like push for when you're on your period, you should be doing light activity and then only do high intensity during the follicular phase and then only low intensity during the luteal phase. And I think that what that kind of does is limits women's ability to exercise and perform.
Yeah,
We've been doing it this whole time
yes.
before any of this kind of new thought came up, and we've been doing it really well. The big piece is just considering how it's making you feel. So, a lot of the
Mhm,
literature that's showing that there may be some differences is in how you're perceiving like pain and, the ability to perform kind of changes. So, even if like my study showed that there aren't really large changes across the menstrual cycle, if you go into the gym and you're not feeling very well
right.
and, that could impact your lift while you might be able to physiologically do it and perform at that same level, you're just not feeling the ability to
Mhm,
do it the same way. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. And so, right now, like, being able to track just I would recommend, like, on a paper or just, like, a notebook,
mhm,
some of your symptoms or just how you're feeling. That can be really helpful, for performance measures. But just an active exercise user, my recommendation is always just going to be get out there and exercise, do the form that you find is going to really get you out every single day, or at least 5 times a week to move your body, and that does not need to change
yeah,
depending on what kind of hormonal contraception you're using or uh, what phase of the menstrual cycle you're in.
yeah.
Exercise is always going to be beneficial no matter what.
Being a PT, I definitely appreciate that. No, it's so interesting to me. We're in this time period where, for now, most people have pretty easy access to
Hmm.
hormonal contraceptives here in the States. But I feel like there was almost like a little bit of backlash recently of like, oh, it's bad for you or this or that. I'm like, ladies, do you know what it took for us to
Hmm.
get it?
Yeah.
And and I think we've lost a little bit of the history of, you know, before all of this, if we got pregnant, we did not have options.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so it's almost like a point of privilege
it
at
is.
this point to choose whether to take an oral or not an oral, but like just any sort of contraceptive or
Mhm.
not that may or may not influence your body. But again, this narrative of taking things are bad for you. I'm like,
Right.
eh,
And I agree 100%, and what I always kind of say if, like, coaches are asking me about this or health
right.
professionals, it's like, "Okay, well, would you rather train an individual using an oral contraceptive or a pregnant athlete?" And, like,
Right.
you kinda have to think about this in terms of, like, this is a huge piece of, like,
Yes.
bodily autonomy, and we don't really have a lot of data to really say, like, "No, this does not" like, it affects it or it doesn't. And there are so many researchers out here working to create that, to like really push for it and have high level, like very rigorous studies that we can really rely on.
Mhm.
But we're not there yet. And so I think that
Yeah.
that's big caution. So, yes, that's a big thing for me. And then also just like knowing that if you are on oral contraceptive or hormonal IUD, that's so important in symptom management. And
Mhm.
so, for athletes, going back to what I was saying, that perception, if you're having very painful periods or very painful, like premenstrual cycle syndrome, then that can be like a game changer for athletes to
Right.
feel really good and then also be able to predict when their menstrual cycles are coming. So, for a lot of athletes, if you're exercising a lot, even if you aren't in reds, you can still have variable menstrual cycles.
Mhm.
And that can cause like a lot of stress, like not knowing when it's coming. Is it, how long has it been between cycles? So if you get put onto the or contraceptive pill, okay, it's coming on these dates, it'll be here.
Mhm.
So it offers a lot of help too for
Yeah.
female athletes to manage the menstrual cycle
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah, no, I feel like again, it goes back to that individual conversation. Like if
Mhm.
I have an athlete, a young athlete that may have gotten a late period anyway, maybe at risk for
Right.
energy deficiency, and somebody's just putting it on her so she has has a cycle. Like, I don't know about that one.
Exactly.
But I also go back and I look at all the girls that had the strong painful periods
Yeah.
when they were young, got put on the pill, and then now they're in their 20s, they're being told to come off of it because it's bad for them, and now they have all this pain. Because guess
Mhm.
what? They've got endometriosis, and guess what the treatment is? Like,
The
to
pain.
have some
Yeah.
consistency,
Mhm.
but they never got diagnosed because they just so I feel like it just there's a lot of conversations that need to happen, and it's
Mhm.
not just a blanket good or bad, like, we need to dive into these
Right.
kinda nuances for sure.
Yes, I agree. And I think that the big thing is like that conversation with like the healthcare provider is really important, but
Mhm.
also having coaches be comfortable
Yes.
having these conversations
Yep.
because you said it earlier, like a lot of times people don't even really understand the menstrual cycle itself. And
Mhm.
then like we get introduced like, oh, oral contraceptive is bad, but they don't even understand really what's occurring naturally in a
Right.
menstrual cycle itself. So just that education piece is gonna be really important, and being able to have coaches who are knowledgeable enough to, like, have those conversations and
Mhm.
not treat this as, like, a taboo topic,
Yes.
would be very empowering.
No,
I think
I
those would be, like, the right steps in the right
yep,
direction before telling an athlete to come off, just being able to have a conversation about
yep.
why they started taking the contraception type and
Mhm.
was it for painful periods? Then, okay, well, it's working, so we're not
Right.
seeing, like, changes in your performance from this.
Yep. That's where I give so much credit to, I guess this is 2 years ago now, a couple of major running books came out, Lauren
Mhm.
Fleshman's one, Good for a Girl,
Yes.
Kara
Love
Goucher's
that
book,
one. Both
both literally ripped the conversation wide open, and for
yeah.
them, they shared, kind of their experiences as young athletes that were probably being overtrained and underfueled and
Right.
navigating, all this kinda stuff, but again, it's like, do we even have coaches? And I mean, this is like back kind of before it was normal to have nutritionists giving you decent
Yeah.
advice too. Like,
Mhm.
we need to have people at the table that we're not just going based on what we've always done. It's got to be based on, hey, what do we know now? What's best for, these girls in front of us? And let's look at their longevity and make sure that we're not crashing and burning by the time they're, in their mid 20s.
Yes, exactly. And I think you hit on a really, really important part is that are these women underfueling? Like, if they're seeing changes in their performance and the coach is immediately like, "Oh, well, it's because you're on an oral contraceptive," that I think is really underserving athletes because you're not figuring out, like, as a holistic approach to
Hmm.
exercise what's going on. Like,
Yep.
maybe they've really started restricting their diet, or maybe they've increased their training load and haven't increased their nutrition intake to
Yep.
match. And so just having this like jump to, oh, it's oral contraceptives, that's why you're performing bad. We need to
Hmm.
cycle sync our activities. It's like we should really be focusing still on the fundamentals and making
Right.
sure that women are eating enough because we know across the board that female athletes undereat, women in general typically undereat.
Yep.
And so being able to just address those and focus on those key macronutrients and bring it back to like the beginning, our vitamins and minerals and just like
Yeah.
the dietary patterns, like those would be so much more beneficial conversations, I think, than
Yep.
taking them off of the pill
Right. Now
or
that conversation too, like I
Mhm.
jump it ahead to kind of my vintage. You've got masters athletes that maybe didn't didn't have, great support when they were younger athletes. Again, were under fueling, overtraining, never learned good nutrition. I think there's some data looking at I don't know if it was just specifically ultra runners or just long distance runners that had eating disorders when they were younger and competed, and they're more likely to come back and have eating disorders as master athletes too. So it's not just, hey, you made it through this period of time and you're good to go. It's like, no, you're at risk all the way through. We need to keep talking about good nutrition. We
Mhm.
need to keep having conversations about the bone changes and energy changes as you go into perimenopause and menopause, because like you just got to stay on top of it. You can be just as at risk for, bone stress injuries going into perimenopause too in a low energy
Right.
state. So, um,
Yes, I agree, and I would say, like, argue maybe even during the perimenopause time is even a greater risk of energy
yeah,
deficiency
yeah.
because all of the body compositions that just naturally occur with
Hmm.
perimenopause and menopause, you don't have any control over that.
Hmm.
And so, like this increase in central adiposity, even if you're not gaining weight, you're going to notice those changes and feel like you are. And so, that could lead to just more energy restriction or just like, increasing some of these risk factors unintentionally just because of things out of the
Right.
control for body composition
Yep.
wise.
I love yeah, I think you called it central adiposity,
Yeah,
and the
so
translation is you got a muffin top and you're a little fluffy around the middle.
yeah. Thank you.
Yes, it's a
My academic
thing.
terms.
No, but again, like, if all we were taught was, the diet fad when we were
Yeah.
younger and to,
Mhm.
eat very little and overtrain, like, that isn't gonna cut it at this stage,
Right.
and actually making sure that you're eating adequately to
Mhm.
meet your activity demands is you're actually gonna end up better off than if you're functioning in a deficit. But again, like, that's not how we were taught as kids.
No,
Like,
and not as women at all. We were always taught to,
mm-mm.
like, have a certain eating pattern and look a certain way,
Mhm.
and that kind of creates these, like, questions that we don't really know the right questions to ask, and then also
Yeah.
we're just in this culture where it's like, "Well, you should just lose weight, exercise, and eat less," and
Right.
that's just the recommendation that's not going to be helpful for anyone, but especially women transitioning through perimenopause.
Well, even I'm thinking in my population, the conversation comes up a lot. One, because physicians are like, "Oh, you have back pain in postpartum because you're overweight." I'm like,
Right.
no, we don't have data to support that." Two, women that were taught as girls that they had to have a certain aesthetic are now in their 40s sucking everything in and wonder why
Right.
they have high tone pelvic floor and high tone muscles because everything
Mhm.
and they don't know any different because that's what they were always taught. And to let go feels like a complete loss of control. Like
Right.
all these conversations about how we got there, there's such an interweaving between societal messaging, what we were taught to eat, exercise, how we view ourselves, how we value ourselves. Like you can't not have these bigger conversations when you're
Right.
talking about, how we got here and why the
Yeah.
changes need to occur. Um,
Right. And I will say I was at the, Menopause Society
oh,
meeting.
you went.
I did, yes. And I went specifically to the, NIH research talk, as, I'm trying to get into this world a little bit more, help with all
Mhm.
these questions. And, part of how that works is there's certain codes that get tagged for grants that are awarded.
Mm,
And that is a way that we can track how much funding is going to certain populations, such as postmenopausal women, perimenopausal women. And that was not an official code until this year, 2024.
oh,
So we haven't even been able to track up until this point how much of the US dollars are being even spent on
mhm,
menopause research. And then the other thing too is they actually went by hand and did a bunch of testing for it. And there weren't really many studies that were looking at just menopause and
yeah,
just perimenopause. It was like postmenopausal women with Alzheimer's disease risk or postmenopausal women with,
right,
diabetes. So they had these like comorbidity diseases that they're living with, which
mhm,
is obviously very important. But for individuals who may be healthier and still experiencing these transitions and increase in vasomotor symptoms, changes in body composition,
mhm,
or hot flashes, those are things that still need a lot of work in.
yeah,
So I think that the to say all of this is that it's moving in the positive direction. I think that hopefully
yep,
we can still increase that over these next 4 years and still push forward. But the landscape is moving in that positive direction.
yeah.
Mhm.
I think so too. I think, even just recently with, the WHI being kind of
Mhm.
cleared up and debunked and so on, I think it just opened up a floodgates to have
Yes.
these conversations. And I love that you are like at the forefront of two of the biggest conversations in
Mhm.
contraception, the impact of that in nutrition. So keep pumping out the literature. Thank you very much.
Yes, yes. I'm, very passionate about it, and I think that, if I had to like, I know I'm not even close to the well, hopefully, but the perimenopausal time period yet, but I think that my big thing is, like, even women that are my age, like, early 30s, like,
Hmm.
the earlier you can start, the better,
Yep.
and we don't necessarily have that messaging yet, and so it's a
Hmm.
big piece of my research is, yes, with the hormonal contraception, but that's in that pre-menopause time period and what we
Yep.
can do to support health even later on in life.
Yeah.
So yes, thank you.
No, I totally agree. Again, the more I've kind of drunk from the fire hose here, the more I'm
Mhm.
looking back at early postpartum. It's almost a parallel state from a
Right.
hormonal perspective. And
Mhm.
what things have we missed? What things do we need to look at? And then how do we go back even a step earlier? I've got an 11-year-old daughter at home. How do I prepare her for what's to come and normalize what I
Exactly.
need to learn now? How do we normalize that much earlier on? So,
Right. And I think it is changing just like the
it is.
landscape of
Yeah,
our environment, how that's influencing it. Maybe like our mothers and grandmothers, they had a different time going through menopause. They may not
yep,
have experienced as many symptoms. And so now, kind of the adjustment of, like you said, like the WHI with some of that increased risk that maybe wasn't actually there with hormonal therapy. I think
yep,
that conversation is changing again. So,
yeah,
yes, that's something that I want to see in these next few years coming out more too, is being
yeah,
able to help and support women through the transition and help
yeah,
them feel the best that they can.
exactly. Well, I, for one, being in the middle of that firestorm right now, I appreciate that. So, if you
Yeah.
know more about Hannah, you can find her over on X. Maybe she'll switch to Blue Sky. We don't know. Um, Hannah Cabra.
I love it. I'll keep the
There.
same username if I switch
Okay,
it.
thank
I
you.
would switch
Yeah,
yeah.
this is gonna run in a little bit, not immediately, but yes, you can find her on social.
Yes.
And definitely, if you're in the research space, if you're in the healthcare space, go on PubMed and just plop her name in there, and you're gonna have a lot of reading to do. So Hannah Cabra, thank you so much for sharing all your information, and appreciate the work you're doing. And I hope in a couple years we can have this conversation and we're light years further than we are right now. So thanks for
Yes.
joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
If you're navigating pregnancy, postpartum, or perimenopause, whether personally or professionally, check out all our free resources and upcoming courses at carriepagliano.com. This podcast reflects the opinions of Dr. Carrie Pagliano and her guests, and it is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider with any medical questions. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. And thanks for listening.